That's right. It's a special edition of Office Hours. What is special about this edition? What is unique? What is differentiated? What is hold the phone? I just won the lottery kind of special. I didn't shower this morning, and I'm feeling a bit gamey, and I'm in a small room, and I can smell myself, and I am drunk on wisdom and insight and irreverence. That's right. Special, especial. That was especially strange and weird even for me. The reason this is special, this reason this episode stands out is we are with the interesting and dynamic Joanna Coles, fashion legend and former chief content officer at Hearst Magazine. She was also a producer for ABC Studios and is on the board of several companies, including Snap. And in general, I just find Joanna to be very grounded and thoughtful and also fearless. So let's do it. Welcome, Joanna, and your neighbor. We're in the same hood.
We are in the same hood, and I am just thrilled you've squeezed me onto your schedule because now you've got two podcasts with Cara Swisher. It's bizarre. And I was just saying that it's the only thing that gets me to the gym is the prospect of listening to your podcast with Cara Swisher. So you've doubled the amount of exercise I'm doing on the treadmill. Thank you.
You will live longer and be happier.
I will be more miserable, but I will live longer.
You get that time back. That's my thesis.
So depressing being on a treadmill.
So the way we're going to let this roll is we have a bunch of people calling in. We went on Twitter. We asked your questions. Thanks very much. And we'll hear what Joanna has to say, and then we'll move on to some other specific topics. So let's roll the first question.
Hey, this is Anthony Onesto, and I'm creator of Ella the Engineer, which is a comic book series to encourage girls to pursue STEM technology. My question for Joanna is, given the amount of content, or at least the amount of content that's needed by all these different providers, Netflix and Hulu and Apple, how does a person like me get in contact with a producer or a company to help bring an idea like a comic book into an animated series for kids? Thank you very much.
Well, the great thing about today's world as opposed to 30 years ago is that you have got the most almighty board on which to show people your work. So I would start putting out daily Instagrams or weekly Instagrams of Elle the Engineer. I would send copies of the book to absolutely everybody you can. I think you have to be your own marketing genius here. You can make tiny little films of her little animated GIFs and get her about. Send her to influencers, send her to people that you like, send her to producers of shows that you admire that make sense. I mean, don't send her to Quentin Tarantino. That doesn't seem to make sense to me. But choose producers whose work you admire and who are in the ballpark of Elle the Engineer. It sounds like a very good idea. It also sounds like it's probably aimed at, well, there may be a younger version of it and then a slightly older version of it. But you have the most extraordinary opportunity to make your work available to people for free online. That's exciting. And then from there, you grow it. And if you can grow your own audience and create something, your own feed, and then show people you've begun to build an audience and that you're getting engagement with that, then it's much easier to go to a producer and say, look, I think there's something here. I need you to help me grow it.
Anthony, just start fucking doing it, boss. Get out there. Ella the Engineer, get her out there.
And she sounds good. I wanna hear all about her. But you don't need to wait for someone else 100%. To do it. You can do it yourself.
Get on it.
And then hopefully someone else will spot it and help you amplify it.
Yeah. All right, next question.
Snapchat has revolutionized the way the younger generations communicate with its visual-first medium. Now Snapchat has increasingly focused its efforts on semi-professional and professional content via its Discover platform. How do you, as an expert in content distribution and content creation, evaluate Snapchat's success early on? And do you believe that Snapchat has the potential to be the TV replacement for younger generations?
Can Snapchat be the TV for the younger generation?
Well, I definitely think it can. I mean, I think its primary purpose, Snap, is to connect you with your friends immediately. It's a super fast method of communication. And the fun about Snap, which not everybody understands, is the intimacy of it as a communication method. It's super fun. It's where you live your life. It's not performative. But the fun is when you're waiting to hear from someone or you're in a sort of manic back and forth and you've got a couple of down moments, you can swipe to the right and pick up Discover, which is actually particularly now where Gen Z and a lot of millennials get their news. Cosmo was one of the first of the 12 publishers that first appeared on it. Wall Street Journal's on there, New York Times is on there, ESPN is on there. And so there is a massive smorgasbord of content, which is really lively and very fun and done specifically for Snap, so it feels media appropriate. Yeah. And I definitely think it's a huge part of the Snap experience. It won't ever replicate the intimate friend-to-friend fun communication, but I think it's an essential part of it.
Yeah,
and it's surfaced all sorts of things. I mean, one of my favorite people on it is Peter Hamby, who is our man at, what's it called, Good Luck America. And he started it before the last election. And he's a very funny reporter. He came from CNN, fantastically good and different take, slightly irreverent take, but very lively, very fun. There's Brother on there, which is a kind of bro-y content. Cosmo's still on there. It became a habit for people. It was the sort of thing that people would check first thing in the morning when they were waking up. And it feels like it's a different, I don't think of it as replacing television. I think of it as being something new.
Yeah.
And it's short and it's fast and it's fun.
Next question.
Hi, Joanna. Madeline McKendrick here. I'm inspired by all you've accomplished and all you've done throughout your career. I just have a couple of questions, hopefully a bit hard-hitting. What is your take on what I call the big business of women's empowerment? Does it actually empower women? Or is it a different version of the same, not good enough without our product messaging? And also, what's your take on Me Too? What do you think it will take to see real sustainable change in the publishing and media industry? Thank you for taking my questions, and thank you for your time.
We're going to need a bigger boat. There's a lot in there.
I was going to say that's enormous. Although I did like the way it began because she said she was a big fan. So I like Madeline very much.
You agree there. You have common ground there. So what do you think of big business, the big business of women's empowerment? Does it actually empower women, or is it a different version of the same, not good enough without our product messaging?
Well, I love the way that Twitter holds people to account now. So when you have, beauty brands or hair brands adopting female empowerment, and then people point out they're all run by men, there are no women on the board, or there's only one woman on the board, I think it's absolutely thrilling. I think women's empowerment is great in brands when it's genuine and when it actually makes a difference, and when it's being used cynically, which obviously it is in a lot of places at the moment, then it's ridiculous. And you can see marketing people jumping on bandwagons. I used to get called up all the time to sort of validate campaigns that, were just the most cynical thing, and you knew that they would roll on to climate change the next season. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's climate change, there's gun control, there's women's empowerment. We all get thrown.
The industry of woke washing.
It's woke washing. Yeah, it's exactly what it is.
So say more about the Me Too movement and what it means for women. Do women come out of this, on the other side of this, better, worse, the same?
Well, I'm very interested in what happens to consensual relationships. And you think of the chief executive of McDonald's, who recently had to step down because he was having a consensual affair with an employee. He was separated. She was single. That's my understanding of it. And we live in a country, and our popular media suggests that when you meet someone, there's this whole sense around digital dating. The minute you meet them, when you sit down next to them in a bar, you know whether or not this is going to work, right? And you've got horror stories of people saying, oh my goodness, we had a great conversation digitally, and now I've met you. I don't want to waste your time. I'm sure you're a really nice person, but let's not even bother with having this drink,
doesn't work
right?
that way.
In fact, it doesn't work that way at all. You're much more likely to get to like someone when you actually spend time with them and when you work with them. And often you hear stories of couples who got married who hated each other on first sight. And actually, it's spending time with someone working on a joint project, which is actually what builds a relationship, builds trust, which is a fantastic basis for a relationship. And then at a certain point, you realize you might have fallen in love. Yeah. And that's the bit I'm really concerned that people lose in this whole Me Too environment, which I'm very supportive of.
I believe that once you get above a certain level of seniority in a company, there's some outstanding benefits: money, prestige, access. There's a lot of membership has its privileges once you get above a certain level. And I believe once you get above a certain level, that's it. You can't have relationships at work. I think that's a fair thing to ask people, given this environment, given the opportunities for abuse of power.
given, I don't think it's...
And I think the issue is that it's very difficult for people to not have them. I agree that you probably, certainly, and I've no idea whether or not the CEO of McDonald's did this, you have to flag it to HR, or you have to flag it to a colleague. Because what you can't have is the impropriety of power, right? That's what's wrong.
Joanna, talk to me about the balance, if you will, or the tension, or I'm not sure you believe there's a tension, of kids and career.
Well, one of the questions I get most is, how do you manage kids and career? And what I'm fascinated by is how negative the conversation in our world is about women having kids and career. And in fact, we know that the numbers have dropped now. It's only one, I think in the 70s, it was 1 in 10 women chose not to have children. Now 1 in 5 are choosing not to have children. And the entire conversation around women's careers is really hijacked by, can you do it with kids? No, you can't.
Right.
And I'm fascinated by the slew of TV shows out there at the moment, like Working Moms, which is very funny, Motherhood, very funny, that portray the chaos, which indeed is true, of working and having kids. But I'm concerned that we don't do a good enough job reminding people it can really be fun and rewarding having kids. The only conversation we have around kids really is how difficult it is, how expensive they are, how they're all going to graduate with debt and none of them are going to get any jobs, and they're all going to move back home when they finish college. And you're like, actually, kids are fantastic. They're super funny. They're creative. They fill up your life. The engine of family life is so valuable. And, you know, they're wonderful. I remember when I was pregnant, someone said to me, the reason you're really going to enjoy having a child is that it is going to stop you thinking about yourself. 100%. It is such a relief to have something else.
You know what
to
you're doing this
about.
weekend? You don't have to plan brunch. You don't have to think, how am I fabulous? Like, okay, I'm taking a soccer practice and we're going to that party at Buster's on Sunday. You're just thinking about other people.
And the relief that actually that brings, that there's a duty to having to look after someone else. It's and it's good for your soul liberating. And it's good for your heart.
You've actually said that having kids changes the trajectory of your career in a positive way.
Well, it certainly changed the trajectory of my career in a positive way, which I didn't understand at the time. I was a foreign correspondent. It was my absolute dream job. I was based here in New York. And then I realized when I had my second son, I couldn't do that job anymore because you had to really be able to travel at the drop of a hat. There was a big story, you had to go. And you wanted to go. It was exciting. When I had my second son, I realized I couldn't possibly do that. I moved into magazines and I had a desk job. The first couple of years were really miserable. I hated being stuck in an office. But then I began to thrive in it. And then I ended up running, content for 300 magazines globally. And I had a super amount of fun. And it was fantastic. And I would never have gone on that management track if I hadn't had kids. Yeah. And it also made me a super efficient worker because there was work and there was family for a long period. When your kids are little
Working
like that,
moms
that's all
done.
there is.
They're always more organized.
I would always, I loved hiring. I was thrilled when women got pregnant because I knew it meant they would come back and they would be super efficient. And I would try and help them. And the worst people to work for are those people that call you in at 5 to 6 when you're just trying to get out the door and want to sit and talk to you forever. Yeah. So I always used to try and make my exit very strategic when my kids were little. But I always tried to support women who had children because they were always great workers.
You have 2 boys, right?
I have 2 sons, yeah.
2 sons. So I have 2 sons too. Yours are a little bit older than mine. And I have this cottage, it's not an industry or a cottage passion and hobby. I advise a lot of my friends, mostly young sons. Occasionally I meet with their daughters, but 9 out of 10 times it's their sons. And I end up telling them the same thing their parents tell them, but they won't listen to their parents, right?
Of course not, because you never want to hear what your parents have to say.
Yeah, so maybe they've seen me on YouTube, so they think, oh, this guy has some credibility. I'll let him speak to my son or what have you. So what I think a lot of people are, one of my theses is that a lot of people think about the stress of raising kids and boys. It's kind of 0 to 18, and then once they're off to college, it's like, whew, sweat. Okay, good, they're out. What I'm experiencing with a lot of my friends, a lot of my peers who had kids at a normal age, much younger than me, and now have kids 17, 18, 25, 28, 30, is that young men are really struggling. And that I meet a lot of young women, and this sounds politically correct, and it's not meant to be, but when I meet a 23 or a 25-year-old woman, a decent proportion of them feel like they're going to be senator at some point. 7 out of 10 high school valedictorians are girls. Girls mature faster. And a lot of the boys I meet are struggling. And I don't know if it's because they look at dad and because the majority of my friends have done well economically and there's a certain level of expectation or expectance that doesn't get instilled in girls. But I see a lot of young men struggling. It's more competitive now. I think the expectations on these young men are higher, but at the same time somewhat conflicted or inconsistent. And I see a lot of parents finding as much or more stress raising young adult men as when they were raising boys.
I think it's a really interesting point. I also think they also have grown up with a phenomenal amount of porn. And I think that impacts the sexual relationships that they have. And the constant pull of it is really problematic for them, actually. And I think it's given them a very false sense of what sex can be. And I think it's complicated for young women too. I'm not saying just for men. But porn in particular, I think, is this extraordinary. I mean, Gail Dines, who's a brilliant lecturer on this subject, calls it the biggest uncontrolled experiment the society has ever played on its kids or ever worked on its kids. And I really think a lot of them are in sort of almost post-traumatic stress disorder from having had so much access to it, and then trying to understand that their real relationships aren't like, or that real sex isn't like the sex that they've seen on porn. But clearly it's a better time to be a young woman right now. A lot of companies making efforts to make them feel empowered, make them feel included, and everybody feels like it's white boys' time to stand at the back of the line. Yeah, they're paying the sins of their father's generation.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like that. Women without kids under the age of 30 have closed the wage gap. As a matter of fact, there's obviously more young women now in college. Companies, the top tech companies, have finally figured out that women are the future on a lot of levels. I don't think it's about morality. It's just about demographics and actual economics. I'm fascinated what you said, though, about porn, because I grew up in an era where you would steal your father's Playboy, and that was your access to porn. And it also, in a weird way, it's a little bit like dating. I can't imagine if I'd had access to porn before I had relationships, if I would have been as aggressive or trying or investing as much to try and form relationships.
Well, and all the stats show that actually they're having less sex now. I mean,
Isn't that weird?
I was talking to a friend whose son's computer had been confiscated at school, and the father was called in by the school teacher who said that they'd looked at the time and he'd spent from 1 till 4 a.m. on porn sites. Now, this kid was 12.
Right.
The sites he'd been looking at were, the parents hadn't got controls on the computer, or they thought that the kids can get around these things now. It's not that difficult. It's not beyond the wit of man. And do you think this poor child, should be asleep at this time? Of course, he's going to fail out of school if he can't get enough sleep. And we give them this device full of all this temptation. It's very hard for them to manage.
Or just a phone. Or even just a phone.
Yeah, or even just a phone, right? Even just playing video games.
I can't figure out how much of it is a problem or because of incremental opportunities or devices, and how much of it is because we now have the reconnaissance or espionage tools to watch our kids at all times.
Well, there's an element of both, right? They're not mutually exclusive, but we do know that anxiety is through the roof in Gen Z. 100%. I mean, it is through the roof. 1 in 5 young women are on antidepressants. I don't know what the figures are for men.
Self-harm's up, teen suicide's up.
Yeah, it's all up. So that we've got a generation that needs looking after.
So if you could give a few pieces of advice to parents who are raising young men, is there anything best or worst practices, observations having to boys/men? Well,
I've got fantastically old-fashioned advice, and I don't ever want to be one of those people that offers myself up as a perfect parent. The things that I have found that have worked are getting them outside into nature, which is almost impossible, but absolutely
you live in Soho,
vital.
Right? So getting them to Washington Square Park.
Right, yeah, exactly. That counts as nature, seeing a tree. I'm a big believer in as much exercise as they can possibly do. And not necessarily in school sports teams. It doesn't have to be for the varsity team. You know, if you can get them walking the dog, you're ahead of the game. I'm a huge believer in sitting down and talking together over meals. Yeah. Very difficult to get them to do that because they want to be in their room. They've got
electronics
of homework. Yeah. To have device-free dinners, I think, is super helpful. To introduce them to other people. It's not surprising to me that parents come to you and ask for you to talk to their kids, because I think there's not enough multi-generational communication. I mean, I'm amazed at how often I can go without ever seeing a toddler, because I don't have toddlers now. I don't come across that many people with toddlers whose toddlers I actually get to see. Yeah. So I wish that we had more multi-generational socializing, and I love it whenever I have it. And I think it's very good for kids, not just to be with kids, but to be with older people and to help much younger kids. And I think also trying to give kids a sense of how lucky they are and that there are people who've got much less than they have. It's a very entitled generation, I think.
All right, well, let's leave it there. Joanna Coles, thank you for coming by. Neighbor. Right.
No, my pleasure. Great fun to come and talk to you in your home studio.
There you go.
I wish people could see it because it's full of what look like egg boxes, but they're not egg boxes. And then lots of black cameras. And we're sitting miles away from each other.
We are sitting miles away from each other. Good to see you. Thanks again, Joanna.
My pleasure.
Algebra of Happiness. Are you an island? When I was 34, I decided I didn't like my life. I was living in San Francisco doing e-commerce startups. I was married. I had a dog, and I just didn't like my life. Or more specifically, that's not right. It wasn't that I didn't like my life. There was another life that I wanted more, and I literally pushed reset on my life. And I got divorced, resigned from the board of the company I started, a red envelope, sold my shares in another company I'd started, Profit Brand Strategy, moved to New York where I'd always wanted to live, and I joined the faculty at NYU. And kind of like, I don't want to say lost touch, but almost, just really didn't stay in contact with my friends in San Francisco and became sort of an island. And I'm a selfish person. I'm comfortable being alone. And I would occasionally just leave the house to go get drunk or get food or, try and meet someone to have sex with. But I was pretty much living like a caveman, but like a lone caveman. And it was an empty experience. As far as empty experiences go, though, it was pretty fucking good. Living in Manhattan with some money and being able to be selfish, which is what you can do when you have a little bit of money in Manhattan, and being, a 35-year-old dude. And I started to realize I am an island, and I don't mind being an island. I'm actually distinct of how charming you might think I am. I'm actually an introvert, and I'm very comfortable being alone. And I kind of considered that lifestyle. I considered having that lifestyle. And some sort of instinct literally came over me. And I remember reading a study about the fact that men who live alone have an average life expectancy 11 years less than men that live with a partner, a wife, a husband, what have you, their kids or friends. And I could tell that this life, while I might enjoy it, that I was going to die sooner. And then not being engaged in other people's lives, slowly but surely, I was just sort of kind of digressing into a weird existence with no kind of real emotional connections. And then if I didn't snap out of it, I was going to become so selfish and so good at being alone that I was never going to be able to re-engage. And so I made a real effort to get out and not only just start dating, but starting to try and have meaningful relationships with people such that possibly I could have kids or potentially get married again. More so I wanted the former. I did not want the latter, but unfortunately, they're usually a package deal. And then I started reinvesting in relationships and friendships, tried to do a better job of staying in touch with my half-sister, the daughter of my dad's third marriage. He's on his fourth, but we think this one's going to work out. And just re-engaging. And it was kind of the smartest thing, or not the smartest thing, the best thing I've done. I think it's important if you have found yourself alone to decide, is that really how you want to live your life? Because if you are going to live your life that way, if you're a dude, women seem to have figured out how to live alone and be okay, but they still have a shorter life expectancy. But if you're a dude, you're going to die a decade sooner on average if you decide to just kind of be alone. In addition, when I look at everything that is really meaningful to me, really meaningful, it gives me a sense of comfort and a sense of joy right now. And it's all the studies show this, and it's passé. but it's all around relationships where I've made massive investments. And just as soldiers are the most patriotic people in the world because of the massive investment they've made in their country, the massive investment I've made in my kids, and you have no choice when you have kids but to make a massive investment because they're such assholes and so demanding. But the kind of the satisfaction I feel with them, the joy I get from raising them with someone that I care about, who's competent and is a good person, that partnership involved there, some of the business relationships I've established, some of the friendships that the people that kind of give me a sense of what it's like to have brothers. These are the most rewarding things in my life and give me a ton of comfort. And I was at a point in my life in my 30s where I had a decision, and I chose relationships. I chose not to live on an island. I chose not to dance in the dark. What a segue to bring up the boss. I remember dancing higher than a kite my sophomore year, CBT UCLA. That's right, the dog was a Bruin. Do not dance in the dark. Dance in the light. Dance with other people. Make connections. Choose life. Choose love. The dog is thinking about you. We'll see you in exactly, or we'll hear from you in exactly 7 days.